I. The date of the fete was definitely fixed, and von Lemke became more and more depressed. He was full of strange and sinister forebodings, and this made Yulia Mihailovna seriously uneasy. Indeed, things were not altogether satisfactory. Our mild governor had left the affairs of the province a little out of gear. At the moment we were threatened with cholera, serious outbreaks of cattle plague had appeared in several places, fires were prevalent that summer in towns and villages, whilst among the peasantry foolish rumors of incendiarism grew stronger and stronger. Cases of robbery were twice as numerous as usual. But all this, of course, would have been perfectly ordinary had there been no other and more weighty reasons to disturb the equanimity of Andrei Antonovich, who had till then been in good spirits. What struck Yulia Mihailovna most of all was that he became more silent and, strange to say, more secretive every day. Yet it was hard to imagine what he had to hide. It is true that he rarely opposed her and as a rule followed her lead without question. At her instigation, for instance, 2 or 3 regulations of a risky and hardly legal character were introduced with the object of strengthening the authority of the governor. There were several ominous instances of transgressions being condoned with the same end in view. Persons who deserved to be sent to prison in Siberia were, solely because she insisted, recommended for promotion. Certain complaints and inquiries were deliberately and systematically ignored. All this came out later on. Not only did Lemke sign everything, but he did not even go into the question of the share taken by his wife in the execution of his duties. On the other hand, he began at times to be restive about the most trifling matters, to the surprise of Yulia Mihailovna. No doubt he felt the need to make up for the days of suppression by brief moments of mutiny. Unluckily, Yulia Mihailovna was unable, for all her insight, to understand this honorable punctiliousness in an honorable character. Alas, she had no thought to spare for that, and that was the source of many misunderstandings. There are some things of which it is not suitable for me to write, and indeed I am not in a position to do so. It is not my business to discuss the blunders of administration either, and I prefer to leave out this administrative aspect of the subject altogether. In the chronicle I've set before myself a different task. Moreover, a great deal will be brought to light by the commission of inquiry which has just been appointed for our province. It's only a matter of waiting a little. Certain explanations, however, cannot be omitted. But to return to Yulia Mihailovna. The poor lady, I feel very sorry for her, might have attained all that attracted and allured her, renown and so on, without any such violent and eccentric actions as she resolved upon at the very first step. But either from an exaggerated passion for the romantic or from the frequently blighted hopes of her youth, she felt suddenly, at the change of her fortunes, that she had become one of the specially elect, almost God's anointed, over whom there gleamed a burning tongue of fire, and this tongue of flame was the root of the mischief, for, after all, it is not like a chignon, which will fit any woman's head. But there is nothing of which it is more difficult to convince a woman than of this. On the contrary, anyone who cares to encourage the delusion in her will always be sure to meet with success. And people vied with one another in encouraging the delusion in Yulia Mihailovna. The poor woman became at once the sport of conflicting influences, while fully persuaded of her own originality. Many clever people feathered their nests and took advantage of her simplicity during the brief period of her rule in the province. And what a jumble there was under this assumption of independence! She was fascinated at the same time by the aristocratic element in the system of big landed properties and the increase of the governor's power, and the democratic element, and the new reforms in discipline, and freethinking, and stray socialistic notions, and the correct tone of the aristocratic salon and the free and easy, almost pothouse, manners of the young people that surrounded her. She dreamed of giving happiness and reconciling the irreconcilable, or, rather, of uniting all and everything in the adoration of her own person. She had favorites too. She was particularly fond of Fyodor Stepanovich, who had recourse at times to the grossest flattery in dealing with her. But she was attracted by him for another reason, an amazing one, and most characteristic of the poor lady. She was always hoping that he would reveal to her a regular conspiracy against the government. Difficult as it is to imagine such a thing, it really was the case. She fancied for some reason that there must be a nihilist plot concealed in the province. By his silence at one time and his hints at another, Fyodor Stepanovich did much to strengthen this strange idea in her. She imagined that he was in communication with every revolutionary element in Russia, but at the same time passionately devoted to her. To discover the plot, to receive the gratitude of the government, to enter on a brilliant career, to influence the young by kindness, and to restrain them from extremes, all these dreams existed side by side in her fantastic brain. She had saved Fyodor Stepanovich, she had conquered him, of this she was for some reason firmly convinced. She would save others. None of them should perish, she should save them all, she would pick them out, she would send in the right report of them, she would act in the interests of the loftiest justice, and perhaps posterity and Russian liberalism would bless her name, yet the conspiracy would be discovered. Every advantage at once. Still, it was essential that Andrei Antonovich should be in rather better spirits before the festival. He must be cheered up and reassured. For this purpose she sent Fyodor Stepanovich to him in the hope that he would relieve his depression by some means of consolation best known to himself, perhaps by giving him some information, so to speak, first hand. She put implicit faith in his dexterity. It was some time since Fyodor Stepanovich had been in Mr. von Lemke's study. He popped in on him just when the sufferer was in a most stubborn mood. 2. A combination of circumstances had arisen which Mr. von Lemke was quite unable to deal with. In the very district where Fyodor Stepanovich had been having a festive time, a sub-lieutenant had been called up to be censured by his immediate superior, and the reproof was given in the presence of the whole company. The sub-lieutenant was a young man fresh from Petersburg, always silent and morose, of dignified appearance though small, stout, and rosy-cheeked. He resented the reprimand and suddenly, with a startling shriek that astonished the whole company, he charged at his superior officer with his head bent down like a wild beast's, struck him, and bit him on the shoulder with all his might. They had difficulty in getting him off. There was no doubt that he had gone out of his mind. Anyway, it became known that of late he had been observed performing incredibly strange actions. He had, for instance, flung 2 icons belonging to his landlady out of his lodgings and smashed up one of them with an axe. In his own room he had, on 3 stands resembling lecterns, laid out the works of Voigt, Molschat, and Buchner, and before each lectern he used to burn a church wax candle. From the number of books found in his rooms it could be gathered that he was a well-read man. If he had had 50,000 francs he would perhaps have sailed to the island of marquises like the cadet to whom Herzen alludes with such sprightly humor in one of his writings. When he was seized, whole bundles of the most desperate manifestos were found in his pockets and his lodgings. Manifestos are a trivial matter too, and to my thinking not worth troubling about. We have seen plenty of them. Besides, they were not new manifestos. They were, it was said later, just the same as had been circulated in the X-province, and Liputin, who had traveled in that district and the neighboring province 6 weeks previously, declared that he had seen exactly the same leaflets there then. But what struck Andrei Antonovich most was that the overseer of Spigulin's factory had brought the police just at the same time 2 or 3 packets of exactly the same leaflets as had been found on the lieutenant. The bundles, which had been dropped in the factory in the night, had not been opened, and none of the factory hands had had time to read one of them. The incident was a trivial one, but it set Andrei Antonovich pondering deeply. The position presented itself to him in an unpleasantly complicated light. In this factory the famous Spigulin scandal was just then brewing, which made so much talk among us and got into the Petersburg and Moscow papers with all sorts of variations. 3 weeks previously one of the hands had fallen ill and died of Asiatic cholera, then several others were stricken down. The whole town was in a panic, for the cholera was coming nearer and nearer and had reached the neighboring province. I may observe that satisfactory sanitary measures had been, so far as possible, taken to meet the unexpected guest. But the factory belonging to the Spigulins, who were millionaires and well-connected people, had somehow been overlooked. And there was a sudden outcry from everyone that this factory was the hotbed of infection, that the factory itself, and especially the quarters inhabited by the workpeople, were so inveterately filthy that even if cholera had not been in the neighborhood there might well have been an outbreak there. Steps were immediately taken, of course, and Andrei Antonovich vigorously insisted on their being carried out without delay within 3 weeks. The factory was cleansed, but the Spigulins, for some unknown reason, closed it. One of the Spigulin brothers always lived in Petersburg and the other went away to Moscow when the order was given for cleansing the factory. The overseer proceeded to pay off the workpeople and, as it appeared, cheated them shamelessly. The hands began to complain among themselves, asking to be paid fairly, and foolishly went to the police, though without much disturbance, for they were not so very much excited. It was just at this moment that the manifestos were brought to Andrei Antonovich by the overseer. Fyodor Stepanovich popped into the study unannounced, like an intimate friend and one of the family. Besides, he had a message from Yulia Mihailovna. Seeing him, Lemka frowned grimly and stood still at the table without welcoming him. Till that moment he had been pacing up and down the study and had been discussing something tête-à-tête with his clerk Blum, a very clumsy and surly German whom he had brought with him from Petersburg, in spite of the violent opposition of Yulia Mihailovna. On Fyodor Stepanovich's entrance the clerk had moved to the door, but had not gone out. Fyodor Stepanovich even fancied that he exchanged significant glances with his chief. "Aha, I've caught you at last, you secretive monarch of the town!" Fyodor Stepanovich cried out laughing, and laid his hand over the manifesto on the table. "This increases your collection, eh?" Andrei Antonovich flushed crimson, his face seemed to twitch. Leave off at once," he cried, trembling with rage. "And don't you dare, sir." "What's the matter with you? You seem to be angry." "Allow me to inform you, sir, that I have no intention of putting up with your sans faken henceforward, and I beg you to remember." "Why, damn it all, he is in earnest." Hold your tongue, Von Lemke stamped on the carpet, "and don't dare." God knows what it might have come to. Alas, there was one circumstance involved in the matter of which neither Fyodor Stepanovich nor even Yulia Mihailovna herself had any idea. The luckless Andrei Antonovich had been so greatly upset during the last few days that he had begun to be secretly jealous of his wife and Fyodor Stepanovich. In solitude, especially at night, he spent some very disagreeable moments. Well, I imagine that if a man reads you his novel 2 days running till after midnight and wants to hear your opinion of it, he has of his own act discarded official relations, anyway. Yulia Mihailovna treats me as a friend, there's no making you out, Fyodor Stepanovich brought out, with a certain dignity indeed. Here is your novel, by the way. He laid on the table a large heavy manuscript rolled up in blue paper. Lemka turned red and looked embarrassed. "Where did you find it?" he asked discreetly, with a rush of joy which he was unable to suppress, though he did his utmost to conceal it. "Only fancy, done up like this, it rolled under the chest of drawers. I must have thrown it down carelessly on the chest when I went out. It was only found the day before yesterday, when the floor was scrubbed. You did set me a task, though." Lemka dropped his eyes sternly. "I haven't slept for the last 2 nights, thanks to you. It was found the day before yesterday, but I kept it, and have been reading it ever since. I've no time in the day, so I've read it at night. Well, I don't like it, it's not my way of looking at things. But that's no matter, I've never set up for being a critic, but I couldn't tear myself away from it, my dear man, though I didn't like it. The 4th and 5th chapters they really are, damn it all, they are beyond words. And what a lot of humor you've packed into it, it made me laugh. How you can make fun of things sans que c'est la Paris. As for the 9th and 10th chapters, it's all about love, that's not my line, But it's effective though. I was nearly blubbering over Igranev's letter, though you've shown him up so cleverly. You know, it's touching, though at the same time you want to show the false side of him, as it were, don't you? Have I guessed right? But I could simply beat you for the ending. For what are you setting up? Why, the same old idol of domestic happiness, begetting children and making money. They were married and lived happy ever afterwards. Come, it's too much. You will enchant your readers, for even I couldn't put the book down, but that makes it all the worse. The reading public is as stupid as ever, but it's the duty of sensible people to wake them up, while you. But that's enough. Goodbye. Don't be cross another time. I came in to you because I had a couple of words to say to you, but you are so unaccountable. Andrei Antonovich meantime took his novel and locked it up in an oak bookcase, seizing the opportunity to wink to Blum to disappear. The latter withdrew with a long, mournful face. I am not unaccountable, I am simply nothing but annoyances, he muttered, frowning but without anger, and sitting down to the table. Sit down and say what you have to say. It's a long time since I've seen you, Fyodor Stepanovich, only don't burst upon me in the future with such manners. Sometimes, when one has business, it's... My manners are always the same. I know, and I believe that you mean nothing by it, but sometimes one is worried. Sit down. Fyodor Stepanovich immediately lolled back on the sofa and drew his legs under him. 3. What sort of worries? Surely not these trifles? He nodded towards the manifesto. I can bring you as many of them as you like. I made their acquaintance in X-Province. You mean at the time you were staying there? Of course, it was not in my absence. I remember there was a hatchet printed at the top of it. Allow me. He took up the manifesto. Yes, there's the hatchet here too, that's it, the very same. Yes, here's a hatchet. You see, a hatchet. Well, is it the hatchet that scares you? No, it's not, and I am not scared, but this business, it is a business, there are circumstances. What sort? That it's come from the factory? He. But do you know, at that factory the workpeople will soon be writing manifestos for themselves. What do you mean? Von Lemke stared at him severely. What I say. You've only to look at them. You are too soft, Andrei Antonovich, you write novels. But this has to be handled in the good old way. What do you mean by the good old way? What do you mean by advising me? The factory has been cleaned, I gave the order and they've cleaned it. And the workmen are in rebellion. They ought to be flogged, every one of them, that would be the end of it. In rebellion? That's nonsense, I gave the order and they've cleaned it. Ek, you are soft, Andrei Antonovich. In the first place, I am not so soft as you think, and in the second place, von Lemke was piqued again. He had exerted himself to keep up the conversation with the young man from curiosity, wondering if he would tell him anything new. Haha, an old acquaintance again, Fyodor Stepanovich interrupted, pouncing on another document that lay under a paper weight, something like a manifesto, obviously printed abroad and in verse. Oh, come, I know this one by heart, a noble personality. Let me have a look at it. Yes, a noble personality it is. I made acquaintance with that personality abroad. Where did you unearth it? You say you've seen it abroad? Von Lemke said eagerly. I should think so, 4 months ago, or maybe 5. You seem to have seen a great deal abroad. Von Lemke looked at him subtly. Pyotr Stepanovich, not heeding him, unfolded the document and read the poem aloud. A noble personality. He was not of rank exalted, he was not of noble birth, he was bred among the people in the breast of Mother Earth. But the malice of the nobles and the Tsar's revengeful wrath drove him forth to grief and torture on the martyr's chosen path. He set out to teach the people freedom, love, equality, to exhort them to resistance, but to flee the penalty of the prison, whip and gallows, to a foreign land he went. While the people waited hoping from Smolensk to far Tashkent, waited eager for his coming to rebel against their fate, to arise and crush the Tsardom and the nobles' vicious hate, to share all the wealth in common, and the antiquated thrall of the church, the home and marriage to abolish once for all. You got it from that officer, I suppose, eh? Asked Pyotr Stepanovich. Why, do you know that officer, then, too? I should think so. I had a gay time with him there for 2 days, he was bound to go out of his mind. Perhaps he did not go out of his mind. You think he didn't because he began to bite? But, excuse me, if you saw those verses abroad and then, it appears, at that officer's. What, puzzling, is it? You are putting me through an examination, Andrei Antonovich, I see. You see, he began suddenly with extraordinary dignity, as to what I saw abroad I have already given explanations, and my explanations were found satisfactory, otherwise I should not have been gratifying this town with my presence. I consider that the question as regards me has been settled, and I am not obliged to give any further account of myself, not because I am an informer, but because I could not help acting as I did. The people who wrote to Yulia Mihailovna about me knew what they were talking about, and they said I was an honest man. But that's neither here nor there, I've come to see you about a serious matter, and it's as well you've sent your chimney sweep away. It's a matter of importance to me, Andrei Antonovich. I shall have a very great favor to ask of you. A favor? By all means, I am waiting and, I confess, with curiosity. And I must add, Pyotr Stepanovich, that you surprise me not a little. Von Lemke was in some agitation. Pyotr Stepanovich crossed his legs. In Petersburg, he began, I talked freely of most things, but there were things, this, for instance, he tapped the noble personality with his finger, about which I held my tongue in the first place, because it wasn't worth talking about, and secondly, because I only answered questions. I don't care to put myself forward in such matters, in that I see the distinction between a rogue and an honest man forced by circumstances. Well, in short, we'll dismiss that. But now that these fools, now that this has come to the surface and is in your hands, and I see that you'll find out all about it, for you are a man with eyes and one can't tell beforehand what you'll do, and these fools are still going on, well, the fact is, I've come to ask you to save one man, a fool too, most likely mad, for the sake of his youth, his misfortunes, in the name of your humanity. You can't be so humane only in the novels you manufacture, he said, breaking off with coarse sarcasm and impatience. In fact, he was seen to be a straightforward man, awkward and impolitic from excess of humane feeling and perhaps from excessive sensitiveness, above all, a man of limited intelligence, as von Lemke saw at once with extraordinary subtlety. He had indeed long suspected it, especially when during the previous week he had, sitting alone in his study at night, secretly cursed him with all his heart for the inexplicable way in which he had gained Yulia Mihailovna's good graces. For whom are you interceding, and what does all this mean? He inquired majestically, trying to conceal his curiosity. Damn it. It's not my fault that I trust you. Is it my fault that I look upon you as a most honorable and, above all, a sensible man, capable, that is, of understanding, damn. The poor fellow evidently could not master his emotion. You must understand at last, he went on, you must understand that in pronouncing his name I am betraying him to you, I am betraying him, am I not? I am I not? But how am I to guess if you don't make up your mind to speak out? That's just it, you always cut the ground from under one's feet with your logic, damn it. Well, here goes, this noble personality, this student, is Shatov, that's all. Shatov? How do you mean it's Shatov? Shatov is the student who was mentioned in this. He lives here, he was once a serf, the man who gave that slap. I know. Lemka screwed up his eyes. But excuse me, what is he accused of? Precisely, and, above all, what is your petition? I beg you to save him, do you understand? I used to know him 8 years ago, I might almost say I was his friend, cried Fyodor Stepanovich, completely carried away. But I am not bound to give you an account of my past life, he added, with a gesture of dismissal. All this is of no consequence, it's the case of 3 men and a half, and with those that are abroad you can't make up a dozen. But what I am building upon is your humanity and your intelligence. You will understand and you will put the matter in its true light, as the foolish dream of a man driven crazy, by misfortunes, by continued misfortunes, and not as some impossible political plot or God knows what. He was almost gasping for breath. I see that he is responsible for the manifestos with the axe, Lemka concluded almost majestically. Excuse me, though, if he were the only person concerned, how could he have distributed it both here and in other districts and in the ex-province, and, above all, where did he get them? But I tell you that at the utmost there are not more than 5 people in it, a dozen perhaps. How can I tell? You don't know? How should I know, damn it all? Why, you knew that Shatov was one of the conspirators. Egg. Fyodor Stepanovich waved his hand as though to keep off the overwhelming penetration of the inquirer. Well, listen. I'll tell you the whole truth, of the manifestos I know nothing, that is, absolutely nothing. Damn it all, don't you know what nothing means? That sub-lieutenant, to be sure, and somebody else and someone else here, and Shatov perhaps and someone else too, well, that's the lot of them, a wretched lot. But I've come to intercede for Shatov. He must be saved, for this poem is his own composition, and it was through him it was published abroad, that I know for a fact, but of the manifestos I really know nothing. If the poem is his work, no doubt the manifestos are too. But what data have you for suspecting Mr. Shatov? Fyodor Stepanovich, with the air of a man driven out of all patience, pulled a pocketbook out of his pocket and took a note out of it. Here are the facts, he cried, flinging it on the table. Lemka unfolded it. It turned out to be a note written 6 months before from here to some address abroad. It was a brief note, only 2 lines. I can't print a noble personality here, and in fact I can do nothing, print it abroad. For Shatov. Lemka looked intently at Fyodor Stepanovich. Varvara Petrovna had been right in saying that he had at times the expression of a sheep. You see, it's like this, Fyodor Stepanovich burst out. He wrote this poem here 6 months ago, but he couldn't get it printed here, in a secret printing press, and so he asks to have it printed abroad. That seems clear. Yes, that's clear, but to whom did he write? That's not clear yet, Lemka observed with the most subtle irony. Why, Kirillov, of course, the letter was written to Kirillov abroad. Surely you knew that? What's so annoying is that perhaps you are only putting it on before me, and most likely you knew all about this poem and everything long ago. How did it come to be on your table? It found its way there somehow. Why are you torturing me, if so? He feverishly mopped his forehead with his handkerchief. I know something, perhaps. Lemka parried dexterously. But who is this Kirilov? An engineer who has lately come to the town. He was Stavrogin's second, a maniac, a madman. Your sub-lieutenant may really only be suffering from temporary delirium, but Kirilov is a thoroughgoing madman, thoroughgoing, that I guarantee. Ah, Andrei Antonovich, if the government only knew what sort of people these conspirators all are, they wouldn't have the heart to lay a finger on them. Every single one of them ought to be in an asylum. I had a good look at them in Switzerland and at the congresses. From which they direct the movement here? Why, who directs it? 3 men and a half. It makes one sick to think of them. And what sort of movement is there here? Manifestos. And what recruits have they made? Sub-lieutenants in brain fever and 2 or 3 students. You are a sensible man, answer this question. Why don't people of consequence join their ranks? Why are they all students and half-baked boys of 22? And not many of those. I dare say there are thousands of bloodhounds on their track, but have they tracked out many of them? 7. I tell you it makes one sick. Lemka listened with attention but with an expression that seemed to say, you don't feed nightingales on fairy tales. Excuse me, though. You asserted that the letter was sent abroad, but there's no address on it. How do you come to know that it was addressed to Mr. Kirilov and abroad too, and that it really was written by Mr. Shadov? Why, fetch some specimen of Shadov's writing and compare it. You must have some signature of his in your office. As for its being addressed to Kirilov, it was Kirilov himself showed it me at the time. Then you were yourself. Of course I was, myself. They showed me lots of things out there. And as for this poem, they say it was written by Herzen to Shadov when he was still wandering abroad, in memory of their meeting, so they say, by way of praise and recommendation, damn it all, and Shadov circulates it among the young people as much as to say, this was Herzen's opinion of me. Ha, cried Lemka, feeling he had got to the bottom of it at last. That's just what I was wondering. One can understand the manifesto, but what's the object of the poem? Of course you'd see it. Goodness knows why I'd been babbling to you. Listen. Spare Shadov for me and the rest may go to the devil, even Kirilov, who is in hiding now, shut up in Filipov's house, where Shadov lodges too. They don't like me because I've turned round, but promise me Shadov and I'll dish them all up for you. I shall be of use, Andrei Antonovich. I reckon 9 or 10 men make up the whole wretched lot. I am keeping an eye on them myself, on my own account. We know of 3 already, Shadov, Kirilov, and that sub-lieutenant. The others I am only watching carefully, though I am pretty sharp-sighted too. It's the same over again as it was in the X-province, 2 students, a schoolboy, 2 noblemen of 20, a teacher, and a half-pay major of 60, crazy with drink, have been caught with manifestos. That was all, you can take my word for it, that was all. It was quite a surprise that was all. But I must have 6 days. I have reckoned it out, 6 days, not less. If you want to arrive at any result, don't disturb them for 6 days and I can kill all the birds with 1 stone for you, but if you flutter them before, the birds will fly away. But spare me Shadov. I speak for Shadov. The best plan would be to fetch him here secretly, in a friendly way, to your study and question him without disguising the facts. I have no doubt he'll throw himself at your feet and burst into tears. He is a highly strung and unfortunate fellow, his wife is carrying on with Stavrogin. Be kind to him and he will tell you everything, but I must have 6 days. And, above all, not a word to Yulia Mihailovna. It's a secret. May it be a secret? What? Cried Lemka, opening wide his eyes. Do you mean to say you said nothing of this to Yulia Mihailovna? To her? Heaven forbid! Andrei Antonovich. You see, I value her friendship and I have the highest respect for her, and all the rest of it, but I couldn't make such a blunder. I don't contradict her, for, as you know yourself, it's dangerous to contradict her. I may have dropped a word to her, for I know she likes that, but to suppose that I mention names to her as I have to you or anything of that sort. My good sir. Why am I appealing to you? Because you are a man, anyway, a serious person with old-fashioned firmness and experience in the service. You've seen life. You must know by heart every detail of such affairs, I expect, from what you've seen in Petersburg. But if I were to mention those two names, for instance, to her, she'd stir up such a hubbub. You know, she would like to astonish Petersburg. No, she's too hot-headed, she really is. Yes, she has something of that fug, Andrei Antonovitch muttered with some satisfaction, though at the same time he resented this unmannerly fellow's daring to express himself rather freely about Yulia Mihailovna. But Fyodor Stepanovitch probably imagined that he had not gone far enough and that he must exert himself further to flatter Lemka and make a complete conquest of him. Fug is just it, he assented. She may be a woman of genius, a literary woman, but she would scare our sparrows. She wouldn't be able to keep quiet for 6 hours, let alone 6 days. Andrei Antonovitch, don't attempt to tie a woman down for 6 days. You do admit that I have some experience in this sort of thing. I mean, I know something about it, and you know that I may very well know something about it. I am not asking for 6 days for fun but with an object. I have heard, Lemka hesitated to utter his thought, I have heard that on your return from abroad you made some expression, as it were of repentance, in the proper quarter? Well, that's as it may be. And, of course, I don't want to go into it. But it has seemed to me all along that you've talked in quite a different style about the Christian faith, for instance, about social institutions, about the government even. I've said lots of things, no doubt, I am saying them still, but such ideas mustn't be applied as those fools do it, that's the point. What's the good of biting his superior's shoulder? You agreed with me yourself, only you said it was premature. I didn't mean that when I agreed and said it was premature. You weigh every word you utter, though. He. You are a careful man. Fyodor Stepanovitch observed gaily all of a sudden. Listen, old friend. I had to get to know you, that's why I talked in my own style. You are not the only one I get to know like that. Maybe I needed to find out your character. What's my character to you? How can I tell what it may be to me? He laughed again. You see, my dear and highly respected Andrei Antonovitch, you are cunning, but it's not come to that yet and it certainly never will come to it, you understand? Perhaps you do understand. Though I did make an explanation in the proper quarter when I came back from abroad, and I really don't know why a man of certain convictions should not be able to work for the advancement of his sincere convictions, but nobody there has yet instructed me to investigate your character and I've not undertaken any such job from them. Consider, I need not have given those two names to you. I might have gone straight there, that is where I made my first explanations. And if I'd been acting with a view to financial profit or my own interest in any way, it would have been a bad speculation on my part, for now they'll be grateful to you and not to me at headquarters. I've done it solely for Shadov's sake, Fyodor Stepanovitch added generously, for Shadov's sake, because of our old friendship. But when you take up your pen to write to headquarters, you may put in a word for me, if you like. I'll make no objection, he. Adieu, though, I've stayed too long and there was no need to gossip so much, he added with some amiability, and he got up from the sofa. On the contrary, I am very glad that the position has been defined, so to speak. Von Lemke too got up and he too looked pleasant, obviously affected by the last words. I accept your services and acknowledge my obligation, and you may be sure that anything I can do by way of reporting your zeal. 6 days, the great thing is to put it off for 6 days, and that you shouldn't stir for those 6 days, that's what I want. So be it. Of course, I don't tie your hands and shouldn't venture to. You are bound to keep watch, only don't flutter the nest too soon, I rely on your sense and experience for that. But I should think you've plenty of bloodhounds and trackers of your own in reserve, haha. Fyodor Stepanovich blurted out with the gaiety and irresponsibility of youth. Not quite so. Lemka parried amiably. Young people are apt to suppose that there is a great deal in the background. But, by the way, allow me one little word, if this Kirillov was Stavrogin's second, then Mr. Stavrogin too. What about Stavrogin? I mean, if they are such friends? Oh, no. There you are quite out of it, though you are cunning. You really surprise me. I thought that you had some information about it. Stavrogin, it's quite the opposite, quite. Avis o lecteur. Do you mean it? And can it be so? Lemka articulated mistrustfully. Yulia Mihailovna told me that from what she heard from Petersburg he is a man acting on some sort of instructions, so to speak. I know nothing about it, I know nothing, absolutely nothing. Adieu. Avis o lecteur. Abruptly and obviously Fyodor Stepanovich declined to discuss it. He hurried to the door. Stay, Fyodor Stepanovich, stay, cried Lemka. One other tiny matter and I won't detain you. He drew an envelope out of a table drawer. Here is a little specimen of the same kind of thing, and I let you see it to show how completely I trust you. Here, and tell me your opinion. In the envelope was a letter, a strange anonymous letter addressed to Lemka and only received by him the day before. With intense vexation Fyodor Stepanovich read as follows. Your Excellency, for such you are by rank. Herewith I make known that there is an attempt to be made on the life of personages of general's rank and on the fatherland. For it's working up straight for that. I myself have been disseminating unceasingly for a number of years. There's infidelity too. There's a rebellion being got up and there are some thousands of manifestos, and for every one of them there will be 100 running with their tongues out, unless they've been taken away beforehand by the police. For they've been promised a mighty lot of benefits, and the simple people are foolish, and there's vodka too. The people will attack one after another, taking them to be guilty, and, fearing both sides, I repent of what I had no share in, my circumstances being what they are. If you want information to save the fatherland, and also the church and the icons, I am the only one that can do it. But only on condition that I get a pardon from the secret police by telegram at once, me alone, but the rest may answer for it. Put a candle every evening at 7 o'clock in the porter's window for a signal. Seeing it, I shall believe and come to kiss the merciful hand from Petersburg. But on condition there's a pension for me, for else how am I to live? You won't regret it, for it will mean a star for you. You must go secretly or they'll wring your neck. Your Excellency's desperate servant falls at your feet. Repentant freethinker incognito. Von Lemka explained that the letter had made its appearance in the porter's room when it was left empty the day before. So what do you think? Fyodor Stepanovich asked almost rudely. I think it's an anonymous skit by way of a hoax. Most likely it is. There's no taking you in. What makes me think that is that it's so stupid. Have you received such documents here before? Once or twice, anonymous letters. Oh, of course they wouldn't be signed. In a different style? In different handwritings? Yes. And were they buffoonery like this one? Yes, and very disgusting. Well, if you had them before, it must be the same thing now. Especially because it's so stupid. Because these people are educated and wouldn't write so stupidly. Of course. But what if this is someone who really wants to turn informer? It's not very likely, Fyodor Stepanovich rapped out dryly. What does he mean by a telegram from the secret police and a pension? It's obviously a hoax. Yes, Lemka admitted, abashed. I tell you what, you leave this with me. I can certainly find out for you before I track out the others. Take it, Lemka assented, though with some hesitation. Have you shown it to anyone? Is it likely? No. Not to Yulia Mihailovna? Oh, heaven forbid! And for God's sake don't you show it her! Lemka cried in alarm. She'll be so upset, and will be dreadfully angry with me. Yes, you'll be the first to catch it. She'd say you brought it on yourself if people write like that to you. I know what women's logic is. Well, goodbye. I dare say I shall bring you the writer in a couple of days or so. Above all, our compact. 4. Though Fyodor Stepanovich was perhaps far from being a stupid man, Fedka the convict had said of him truly that he would make up a man himself and go on living with him too. He came away from Lemka fully persuaded that for the next 6 days, anyway, he had put his mind at rest, and this interval was absolutely necessary for his own purposes. But it was a false idea and founded entirely on the fact that he had made up for himself once for all an Andrei Antonovich who was a perfect simpleton. Like every morbidly suspicious man, Andrei Antonovich was always exceedingly and joyfully trustful the moment he got onto sure ground. The new turn of affairs struck him at first in a rather favorable light in spite of some fresh and troublesome complications. Anyway, his former doubts fell to the ground. Besides, he had been so tired for the last few days, so exhausted and helpless, that his soul involuntarily yearned for rest. But alas! He was again uneasy. The long time he had spent in Petersburg had left ineradicable traces in his heart. The official and even the secret history of the younger generation was fairly familiar to him. He was a curious man and used to collect manifestos, but he could never understand a word of it. Now he felt like a man lost in a forest. Every instinct told him that there was something in Fyodor Stepanovich's words utterly incongruous, anomalous, and grotesque, though there's no telling what may not happen with this younger generation, and the devil only knows what's going on among them, he mused, lost in perplexity. And at this moment, to make matters worse, Blum poked his head in. He had been waiting not far off through the whole of Fyodor Stepanovich's visit. This Blum was actually a distant relation of Andrei Antonovich, though the relationship had always been carefully and timorously concealed. I must apologize to the reader for devoting a few words here to this insignificant person. Blum was one of that strange class of unfortunate Germans who are unfortunate not through lack of ability but through some inexplicable ill luck. Unfortunate Germans are not a myth, but really do exist even in Russia, and are of a special type. Andrei Antonovich had always had a quite touching sympathy for him, and wherever he could, as he rose himself in the service, had promoted him to subordinate positions under him, but Blum had never been successful. Either the post was abolished after he had been appointed to it, or a new chief took charge of the department. Once he was almost arrested by mistake with other people. He was precise, but he was gloomy to excess and to his own detriment. He was tall and had red hair, he stooped and was depressed and even sentimental, and in spite of his being humbled by his life, he was obstinate and persistent as an ox, though always at the wrong moment. For Andrei Antonovich he, as well as his wife and numerous family, had cherished for many years a reverent devotion. Except Andrei Antonovich, no one had ever liked him. Yulia Mihailovna would have discarded him from the first, but could not overcome her husband's obstinacy. It was the cause of their first conjugal quarrel. It had happened soon after their marriage, in the early days of their honeymoon, when she was confronted with Blum, who, together with the humiliating secret of his relationship, had been until then carefully concealed from her. Andrei Antonovich besought her with clasped hands, told her pathetically all the story of Blum and their friendship from childhood, but Yulia Mihailovna considered herself disgraced forever, and even had recourse to fainting. Von Lemke would not budge an inch, and declared that he would not give up Blum or part from him for anything in the world, so that she was surprised at last and was obliged to put up with Blum. It was settled, however, that the relationship should be concealed even more carefully than before if possible, and that even Blum's Christian name and patronymic should be changed, because he too was for some reason called Andrei Antonovich. Blum knew no one in the town except the German chemist, had not called on anyone, and led, as he always did, a lonely and niggardly existence. He had long been aware of Andrei Antonovich's literary peccadillos. He was generally summoned to listen to secret tête-à-tête readings of his novel. He would sit like a post for 6 hours at a stretch, perspiring and straining his utmost to keep awake and smile. On reaching home he would groan with his long-legged and lanky wife over their benefactor's unhappy weakness for Russian literature. Andrei Antonovich looked with anguish at Blum. "I beg you to leave me alone, Blum," he began with agitated haste, obviously anxious to avoid any renewal of the previous conversation which had been interrupted by Pyotr Stepanovich. "And yet this may be arranged in the most delicate way and with no publicity. You have full power." Blum respectfully but obstinately insisted on some point, stooping forward and coming nearer and nearer by small steps to Andrei Antonovich. "Blum, you are so devoted to me and so anxious to serve me that I am always in a panic when I look at you. You always say witty things, and sleep in peace satisfied with what you've said, but that's how you damage yourself. Blum, I have just convinced myself that it's quite a mistake, quite a mistake. Not from the words of that false, vicious young man whom you suspect yourself? He has won you by his flattering praise of your talent for literature. Blum, you understand nothing about it. Your project is absurd, I tell you. We shall find nothing and there will be a fearful upset and laughter too, and then Yulia Mihailovna. We shall certainly find everything we are looking for." Blum advanced firmly towards him, laying his right hand on his heart. "We will make a search suddenly early in the morning, carefully showing every consideration for the person himself and strictly observing all the prescribed forms of the law. The young men, Lyonshin and Telyatnikov, assert positively that we shall find all we want. They were constant visitors there. Nobody is favorably disposed to Mr. Verhovensky. Madame Stavrogin has openly refused him her graces, and every honest man, if only there is such a one in this coarse town, is persuaded that a hotbed of infidelity and social doctrines has always been concealed there. He keeps all the forbidden books, Ryliev's Reflections, all Herzen's works. I have an approximate catalogue, in case of need. Oh heavens! Everyone has these books. How simple you are, my poor Blum. And many manifestos," Blum went on without heeding the observation. "We shall end by certainly coming upon traces of the real manifestos here. That young Verhovensky I feel very suspicious of. But you are mixing up the father and the son. They are not on good terms. The son openly laughs at his father. That's only a mask. Blum, you've sworn to torment me. Think. He is a conspicuous figure here, after all. He's been a professor, he is a well-known man. He'll make such an uproar and there will be such jibes all over the town, and we shall make a mess of it all. And only think how Yulia Mihailovna will take it. Blum pressed forward and did not listen. He was only a lecturer, and of a low rank when he retired. He smote himself on the chest. He has no marks of distinction. He was discharged from the service on suspicion of plots against the government. He has been under secret supervision, and undoubtedly still is so. And in view of the disorders that have come to light now, you are undoubtedly bound in duty. You are losing your chance of distinction by letting slip the real criminal. Yulia Mihailovna. Get away, Blum, von Lemke cried suddenly, hearing the voice of his spouse in the next room. Blum started but did not give in. Allow me, he persisted, pressing both hands still more tightly on his chest. Get away, hissed Andrei Antonovich. Do what you like, afterwards. Oh, my God. The curtain was raised and Yulia Mihailovna made her appearance. She stood still majestically at the sight of Blum, casting a haughty and offended glance at him, as though the very presence of this man was an affront to her. Blum respectfully made her a deep bow without speaking and, doubled up with veneration, moved towards the door on tiptoe with his arms held a little away from him. Either because he really took Andrei Antonovich's last hysterical outbreak as a direct permission to act as he was asking, or whether he strained a point in this case for the direct advantage of his benefactor, because he was too confident that success would crown his efforts. Anyway, as we shall see later on, this conversation of the governor with his subordinate led to a very surprising event which amused many people, became public property, moved Yulia Mihailovna to fierce anger, utterly disconcerting Andrei Antonovich and reducing him at the crucial moment to a state of deplorable indecision. It was a busy day for Fyodor Stepanovich. From von Lemke he hastened to Bogoyavlensky Street, but as he went along Bykovy Street, past the house where Karmazinov was staying, he suddenly stopped, grinned, and went into the house. The servant told him that he was expected, which interested him, as he had said nothing beforehand of his coming. But the great writer really had been expecting him, not only that day but the day before and the day before that. 3 days before he had handed him his manuscript Merci, which he had meant to read at the literary matinee at Yulia Mihailovna's fete. He had done this out of amiability, fully convinced that he was agreeably flattering the young man's vanity by letting him read the great work beforehand. Fyodor Stepanovich had noticed long before that this vainglorious, spoiled gentleman, who was so offensively unapproachable for all but the elect, this writer with the intellect of a statesman, was simply trying to curry favor with him, even with avidity. I believe the young man guessed at last that Karmazinov considered him, if not the leader of the whole secret revolutionary movement in Russia, at least one of those most deeply initiated into the secrets of the Russian Revolution who had an incontestable influence on the younger generation. The state of mind of the cleverest man in Russia interested Fyodor Stepanovich, but hitherto he had, for certain reasons, avoided explaining himself. The great writer was staying in the house belonging to his sister, who was the wife of a kammerherr and had an estate in the neighborhood. Both she and her husband had the deepest reverence for their illustrious relation, but to their profound regret both of them happened to be in Moscow at the time of his visit, so that the honor of receiving him fell to the lot of an old lady, a poor relation of the kammerherr's, who had for years lived in the family and looked after the housekeeping. All the household had moved about on tiptoe since Karmazinov's arrival. The old lady sent news to Moscow almost every day, how he had slept, what he had deigned to eat, and had once sent a telegram to announce that after a dinner party at the mayor's he was obliged to take a spoonful of a well-known medicine. She rarely plucked up courage to enter his room, though he behaved courteously to her, but dryly, and only talked to her of what was necessary. When Fyodor Stepanovich came in, he was eating his morning cutlet with half a glass of red wine. Fyodor Stepanovich had been to see him before and always found him eating this cutlet, which he finished in his presence without ever offering him anything. After the cutlet a little cup of coffee was served. The footman who brought in the dishes wore a swallowtail coat, noiseless boots, and gloves. Ha ha! Karmazinov got up from the sofa, wiping his mouth with a table napkin, and came forward to kiss him with an air of unmixed delight, after the characteristic fashion of Russians if they are very illustrious. But Fyodor Stepanovich knew by experience that, though Karmazinov made a show of kissing him, he really only proffered his cheek, and so this time he did the same. The cheeks met. Karmazinov did not show that he noticed it, sat down on the sofa, and affably offered Fyodor Stepanovich an easy chair facing him, in which the latter stretched himself at once. "You wouldn't like some lunch?" inquired Karmazinov, abandoning his usual habit but with an air, of course, which would prompt a polite refusal. Fyodor Stepanovich at once expressed a desire for lunch. A shade of offended surprise darkened the face of his host, but only for an instant. He nervously rang for the servant and, in spite of all his breeding, raised his voice scornfully as he gave orders for a second lunch to be served. "What will you have, cutlet or coffee?" he asked once more. "A cutlet and coffee, and tell him to bring some more wine. I am hungry," answered Fyodor Stepanovich, calmly scrutinizing his host's attire. Mr. Karmazinov was wearing a sort of indoor wadded jacket with pearl buttons, but it was too short, which was far from becoming to his rather comfortable stomach and the solid curves of his hips. But tastes differ. Over his knees he had a checkered woolen plaid reaching to the floor, though it was warm in the room. "Are you unwell?" commented Fyodor Stepanovich. "No, not unwell, but I am afraid of being so in this climate," answered the writer in his squeaky voice, though he uttered each word with a soft cadence and agreeable gentlemanly lisp. "I've been expecting you since yesterday." "Why?" "I didn't say I'd come." "No, but you have my manuscript." "Have you read it?" "Manuscript? Which one?" Karmazinov was terribly surprised. "But you've brought it with you, haven't you?" He was so disturbed that he even left off eating and looked at Fyodor Stepanovich with a face of dismay. "Ah, that bonjour you mean." "Merci." "Oh, all right. I'd quite forgotten it and hadn't read it. I haven't had time. I really don't know, it's not in my pockets, it must be on my table." "Don't be uneasy, it will be found." "No, I'd better send to your rooms at once. It might be lost, besides, it might be stolen." "Oh, who'd want it? But why are you so alarmed?" "Why, Yulia Mihailovna told me you always have several copies made, one kept at a notary's abroad, another in Petersburg, a third in Moscow, and then you send some to a bank, I believe." "But Moscow might be burnt again and my manuscript with it. No, I'd better send it once." "Stay, here it is." Fyodor Stepanovich pulled a roll of notepaper out of a pocket at the back of his coat. "It's a little crumpled. Only fancy, it's been lying there with my pocket handkerchief ever since I took it from you. I forgot it." Karmazinov greedily snatched the manuscript, carefully examined it, counted the pages, and laid it respectfully beside him on a special table, for the time, in such a way that he would not lose sight of it for an instant. "You don't read very much, it seems," he hissed, unable to restrain himself. "No, not very much." "And nothing in the way of Russian literature?" "In the way of Russian literature? Let me see, I have read something. On the Way or Away, or At the Parting of the Ways, something of the sort, I don't remember. It's a long time since I read it, 5 years ago. I've no time." A silence followed. "When I came I assured everyone that you were a very intelligent man, and now I believe everyone here is wild over you." Thank you, Pyotr Stepanovich answered calmly. Lunch was brought in. Pyotr Stepanovich pounced on the cutlet with extraordinary appetite, had eaten it in a trice, tossed off the wine and swallowed his coffee. This bore, thought Karmazinov, looking at him askance as he munched the last morsel and drained the last drops. This bore probably understood the biting taunt in my words, and no doubt he has read the manuscript with eagerness. He is simply lying with some object. But possibly he is not lying and is only genuinely stupid. I like a genius to be rather stupid. Mayn't he be a sort of genius among them? Devil take the fellow. He got up from the sofa and began pacing from one end of the room to the other for the sake of exercise, as he always did after lunch. Leaving here soon? Asked Pyotr Stepanovich from his easy chair, lighting a cigarette. I really came to sell an estate and I am in the hands of my bailiff. You left, I believe, because they expected an epidemic out there after the war? And no, not entirely for that reason, Mr. Karmazinov went on, uttering his phrases with an affable intonation, and each time he turned round in pacing the corner there was a faint but jaunty quiver of his right leg. I certainly intend to live as long as I can. He laughed, not without venom. There is something in our Russian nobility that makes them wear out very quickly, from every point of view. But I wish to wear out as late as possible, and now I am going abroad for good. There the climate is better, the houses are of stone, and everything stronger. Europe will last my time, I think. What do you think? How can I tell? If the Babylon out there really does fall, and great will be the fall thereof, about which I quite agree with you, yet I think it will last my time. There's nothing to fall here in Russia, comparatively speaking. There won't be stones to fall, everything will crumble into dirt. Holy Russia has less power of resistance than anything in the world. The Russian peasantry is still held together somehow by the Russian God, but according to the latest accounts the Russian God is not to be relied upon, and scarcely survived the emancipation. It certainly gave him a severe shock. And now, what with railways, what with you? I've no faith in the Russian God. And how about the European one? I don't believe in any. I've been slandered to the youth of Russia. I've always sympathized with every movement among them. I was shown the manifestos here. Everyone looks at them with perplexity because they are frightened at the way things are put in them, but everyone is convinced of their power even if they don't admit it to themselves. Everybody has been rolling downhill, and everyone has known for ages that they have nothing to clutch at. I am persuaded of the success of this mysterious propaganda, if only because Russia is now preeminently the place in all the world where anything you like may happen without any opposition. I understand only too well why wealthy Russians all flock abroad, and more so every year. It's simply instinct. If the ship is sinking, the rats are the first to leave it. Holy Russia is a country of wood, of poverty, and of danger, the country of ambitious beggars in its upper classes, while the immense majority live in poky little huts. She will be glad of any way of escape, you have only to present it to her. It's only the government that still means to resist, but it brandishes its cudgel in the dark and hits its own men. Everything here is doomed and awaiting the end. Russia as she is has no future. I have become a German and I am proud of it. But you began about the manifestos. Tell me everything, how do you look at them? Everyone is afraid of them, so they must be influential. They openly unmask what is false and prove that there is nothing to lay hold of among us, and nothing to lean upon. They speak aloud while all is silent. What is most effective about them, in spite of their style, is the incredible boldness with which they look the truth straight in the face. To look facts straight in the face is only possible to Russians of this generation. No, in Europe they are not yet so bold. It is a realm of stone, there is still something to lean upon. So far as I see and am able to judge, the whole essence of the Russian revolutionary idea lies in the negation of honor. I like its being so boldly and fearlessly expressed. No, in Europe they wouldn't understand it yet, but that's just what we shall clutch at. For a Russian, a sense of honor is only a superfluous burden, and it always has been a burden through all his history. The open right to dishonor will attract him more than anything. I belong to the older generation and, I must confess, still cling to honor, but only from habit. It is only that I prefer the old forms, granted it's from timidity. You see, one must live somehow what's left of one's life. He suddenly stopped. I am talking, he thought, while he holds his tongue and watches me. He has come to make me ask him a direct question. And I shall ask him. Yulia Mihailovna asked me by some stratagem to find out from you what the surprise is that you are preparing for the ball tomorrow, Fyodor Stepanovich asked suddenly. Yes, there really will be a surprise and I certainly shall astonish, said Karmazinov with increased dignity. But I won't tell you what the secret is. Fyodor Stepanovich did not insist. There is a young man here called Shatov, observed the great writer. Would you believe it, I haven't seen him? A very nice person. What about him? Oh, nothing. He talks about something. Isn't he the person who gave Stavrogin that slap in the face? Yes. And what's your opinion of Stavrogin? I don't know, he is such a flirt. Karmazinov detested Stavrogin because it was the latter's habit not to take any notice of him. That flirt, he said, chuckling, if what is advocated in your manifestos ever comes to pass, will be the first to be hanged. Perhaps before, Fyodor Stepanovich said suddenly. Quite right too, Karmazinov assented, not laughing, and with pronounced gravity. You have said so once before, and, do you know, I repeated it to him. What, you surely didn't repeat it? Karmazinov laughed again. He said that if he were to be hanged it would be enough for you to be flogged, not simply as a compliment but to hurt, as they flogged the peasants. Fyodor Stepanovich took his hat and got up from his seat. Karmazinov held out both hands to him at parting. And what if all that you are plotting for is destined to come to pass? He piped suddenly, in a honeyed voice with a peculiar intonation, still holding his hands in his. How soon could it come about? How could I tell? Fyodor Stepanovich answered rather roughly. They looked intently into each other's eyes. At a guess? Approximately? Karmazinov piped still more sweetly. You'll have time to sell your estate and time to clear out too, Fyodor Stepanovich muttered still more roughly. They looked at one another even more intently. There was a minute of silence. It will begin early next May and will be over by October, Fyodor Stepanovich said suddenly. I thank you sincerely, Karmazinov pronounced in a voice saturated with feeling, pressing his hands. You will have time to get out of the ship, you rat, Fyodor Stepanovich was thinking as he went out into the street. Well, if that imperial intellect inquires so confidently of the day and the hour and thanks me so respectfully for the information I have given, we mustn't doubt of ourselves. He grinned. But he really isn't stupid, and he is simply a rat escaping. Men like that don't tell tales. He ran to Filipov's house in Bogoy-Avlinsky Street. 6. Fyodor Stepanovich went first to Kirilov's. He found him, as usual, alone, and at the moment practicing gymnastics, that is, standing with his legs apart, brandishing his arms above his head in a peculiar way. On the floor lay a ball. The tea stood cold on the table, not cleared since breakfast. Fyodor Stepanovich stood for a minute on the threshold. "You are very anxious about your health, it seems," he said in a loud and cheerful tone, going into the room. "What a jolly ball, though, foo, how it bounces! Is that for gymnastics too?" Kirillov put on his coat. "Yes, that's for the good of my health too," he muttered dryly. "Sit down. I'm only here for a minute. Still, I'll sit down. Health is all very well, but I've come to remind you of our agreement. The appointed time is approaching, in a certain sense," he concluded awkwardly. "What agreement? How can you ask?" Fyodor Stepanovich was startled and even dismayed. "It's not an agreement and not an obligation. I have not bound myself in any way, it's a mistake on your part." "I say, what's this you're doing?" Fyodor Stepanovich jumped up. "What I choose." "What do you choose?" "The same as before." "How am I to understand that? Does that mean that you are in the same mind?" "Yes. Only there's no agreement and never has been, and I have not bound myself in any way. I could do as I like and I can still do as I like." Kirillov explained himself curtly and contemptuously. I agree. Be as free as you like if you don't change your mind." Fyodor Stepanovich sat down again with a satisfied air. "You are angry over a word. You've become very irritable of late, that's why I've avoided coming to see you. I was quite sure, though, you would be loyal. I dislike you very much, but you can be perfectly sure, though I don't regard it as loyalty and disloyalty." "But do you know," Fyodor Stepanovich was startled again, "we must talk things over thoroughly again so as not to get in a muddle. The business needs accuracy, and you keep giving me such shocks. Will you let me speak?" "Speak," snapped Kirillov, looking away. "You made up your mind long ago to take your life. I mean, you had the idea in your mind. Is that the right expression? Is there any mistake about that?" "I have the same idea still." "Excellent. Take note that no one has forced it on you." "Rather not, what nonsense you talk.